Because like with the team, it's mostly like we all work here because we want this to exist. We know it should exist. Like it's important. And I think with investors, it's more about the opportunity. Like whether you care about healthy eating or not, there is a huge unmet need for this type of product.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Veneri. Today I'm joined by Luke Saunders, founder and CEO of Farmer's Fridge. In this episode, we talk about transforming vending machines to offer fresh, healthy food on the go. Luke shares his 10-plus year journey of scaling the company's network of smart fridges. Plus, we discuss building a vertically integrated food business, using data to optimize operations, and making healthy eating more accessible. Let's get into it. The Fitt Insider Podcast is presented by EGYM. EGYM's smart fitness ecosystem is transforming healthcare through exercise. Combining strength equipment with AI-powered software and corporate wellness platform WellPass, it's leading the shift to proactive, preventative health. Learn more about EGYM's intelligent workout solutions at egym.com. Hey, Luke, welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. And to kick things off, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us about Farmer's Fridge?
So I'm the founder and CEO of Farmer's Fridge. I've been doing this for 11 years. Right before this, I was a traveling salesman for a metal finishing company. And my job was to drive 1,000 miles a week and try to sell coatings to people in factories and engineering roles. And the biggest problem I had in my day-to-day life was just nothing healthy to eat. So it was a lot of fast food and gas stations, and just struck me that there seems like there could be a better way to get fresh, healthy food into more places. And vending machines are actually the most convenient form of food service in the world. 100 million people today are going to go to a vending machine in the United States. So I was like, why isn't there fresh, healthy food in a vending machine? And really kind of backed into the idea that if we made everything and distributed it, we could solve that problem.
And for people who aren't familiar, what the experience looks like today, what do people encounter when they see a Farmer's Fridge? When you say fresh, healthy food, it's like, and vending machine. Those two words are like kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. So what is that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, so I think when people walk up, it's sort of like the last 1% of the work, right? Like it just what you should see is a clean, sort of like high-tech, futuristic looking vending machine. So we've wrapped it in wood and added a huge touchscreen and just made it a differentiated experience from a vending perspective. But what most people tell us they look at first is the food. So there's a huge case with 36 different items in it. You're going to see like fresh salads in a mason jar style jar, and then like wraps, sandwiches, breakfast items, some snacks that we make. So like chips and guac with fresh homemade guac. And then, yeah, hopefully you're so enticed to buy it based on how great it looks that you can, in about 15 seconds, pick something out and get on your way.
Yeah, I think everybody, whether they're traveling salesman like you were, or just living everyday life, it's still, even today, unless you're in like a bigger city, like super hard to find something like healthy to eat. But like even back then, how hard was it like selling this idea, whether you're selling it to investors or selling it to customers, or even trying to get like traction for the concept?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was fortunate. I had a little business that I had sold and had like enough credit on my credit cards and stuff to get the first one up and running without raising any money. So I remember telling people like, I'm gonna try to sell healthier food from a vending machine. It's gonna be fresh, like made that day. And people were like, that's nuts. Like 50% of people just flat out said like I would never buy that. And so my point was like, I'm going to put one in and I'm going to see what people actually do. Because consumers don't always connect the dots that in that way. The way they actually shop is like, what's the fastest, most convenient, most affordable, best tasting option I can get. So like when people, I'm sure were asking like, would you get money out of a machine and never talk to a person? Like my dad still says no. like, but like I can't even imagine waiting in line inside a bank to get cash. So it's like you gotta first just try it. And that was really my thesis was like if you put it out there in the wild, like people will try it. And there's still a lot of skeptical people. Like I hear from people every day that see it and say like, "Oh, I've seen that thing," and I know right away they haven't bought anything. So that's definitely our biggest hurdle, and it's really just educating people about like the what it takes to get it to that fridge. Like we make fresh food every single day. We're chopping whole heads of lettuce. We're cooking things. We're mixing things. We're making dressings. We're working 24 hours a day to get that food made 7 days a week. And then we're putting it on trucks and getting it to fridges that day in most of our markets. And so it's just something that is really a lot of work to make that product something that you're going to buy and say, oh my God, that was so fresh. I can't believe that this is possible. And then hopefully you tell like 10 friends, like, you won't believe this. Like, you would never imagine fresh and vending, but like, I just experienced that.
Two things I think you were just explaining there that I want to get into a little bit more detail. Logistically, there's a lot going on when you talk about distributing, shipping, loading, like making sure that everything you encounter in the vending machine is fresh. So, like, let's just start there. How? Like, how does that happen?
Well, about 500 people across the company are working really hard to make it happen. So it's definitely like a teamwork exercise. And we scaled the business over 11 years. So, like when I first started, we were in a shared kitchen. I was picking up the produce and we were getting there at 4 in the morning and like chopping it up. And then we'd finish and drive it to the machine. The process isn't that different today. It's just a lot more people. And so every single day we're making all that food. One of the biggest innovations is we don't actually know where it's going most of the time. So we look at like what's the actual sales, what's the actual inventory, and then we make a decision about where to send the food at around 6 p.m. And then the drivers go out on the road and deliver it. So
Wow.
we have our own production facility, we have our own distribution network. It includes about 150 employed drivers. Like there are employees with a farmer's fridge van, they have security clearance to go into an airport or a fulfillment center, whatever that may be. And it's just owning that whole system is really what makes it work. And then we've built a lot of technology to actually make that system something that we can manage at scale. So like if I were trying to do this on a spreadsheet, I have 2,000 locations, including retail. You've got like 35 slots per location, 30 SKUs. It's millions and millions of combinations. Like all the data analytics and tech that tells us like what to do every day is pretty critical.
Getting to this point, like you mentioned, it's like, yeah, we've been doing this for the better part of a decade or more. And I'm sure at times as you're talking about it now, it's like, this is a well-oiled machine. Like you own everything kind of vertically integrated, you're scaling it up. Like, what was the other side of that where you're like, this isn't going to work? I don't think that whether it's the model or the logistics or the locations or whatever is like kind of like not performing. You just kind of said, or did you have that experience of just like doubting what was happening or like that challenge you had to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, at every stage of the business, every day, there's like new highs and lows or new challenges that you're trying to overcome. So in that first phase, it was really that question of like, will enough people see this beautiful vending machine full of fresh, delicious food and just buy something? Like I'm not investing in marketing. Like they just have to see this thing and want to buy something. And once we got through that hurdle, it was, can we actually get this into enough locations that this would be a scalable business? So we were testing like hospitals and universities and transit centers and all these places to try to understand like where is the demand for this product. And then it was like, could we refine the products enough to meet the needs of the consumers in those locations? So like when I started, we had a lot of very functionally driven products like a high protein salad or antioxidant salad. And really, our consumers are like everyone that's in a hospital. So they want more, like, I want a Caesar salad. I don't want this functional food. And so we had to adapt in that sense. And then I think the biggest challenge has been like this business really only works at a large scale. So from like that first fridge to the 2,000 locations we have now, I would say that whole period was like, can we continue to like spin all these plates to get to enough scale to actually make this a great business? So like the consumer demand is there, but in order to meet it, you have to invest in all of this infrastructure. You've got to deploy thousands of locations. And so like that, just the brute force of that, I think is the common theme of how hard this has been.
When you talk about locations and 2000 at this point, what makes for a successful location? Whether that you mentioned hospitals, of course, there's airports, there's schools, there's everything in between. What maybe didn't work over the years, and like what now have you hit on? It's like, oh, this is what it really looks like and where we find success.
Yeah, I think for us, it's like how many people are actually on site and that intersecting with like what's the competition and what is that particular group's like interest in healthy eating. So like that's kind of the triangle. And so trying to figure out at the beginning, we needed like 10,000 people in a food court to sell 20 meals. Now, if we have 10,000 people, we're going to sell a lot more than 20 meals in a day because we've evolved the menu, we've got a more well-known brand. And so actually like the number of locations that we can make this work has increased over time. But just trying to triangulate at the beginning, it was just like put it in there and see what happens. Now we have all that historical data. We use a lot of third party information like cell phone tracking and consumer reports to understand like, okay, this hospital has enough people, but it also has the right kind of people that actually like over index towards liking healthier food. And so you're going to sell twice as much food to the same number of people in this location as you would in another location. Another huge component is income level, which seems kind of obvious, but like you can't sell a $16 salad at every location. We have as many fulfillment centers where people are working for minimum wage that we have a fridge as we do airports where the average traveler is making over $100,000 a year. And so a lot of it has been over that 10 years evolving how we show up in those different locations in terms of product mix, pricing, like that to actually allow us to sell the right amount of food to that number of people.
The number of you mentioned a spreadsheet, but now evolving to like this analytics business, so much of it is just that, you're trying to triangulate all these different data points and really like nail it. And then, as you mentioned, being able to scale across that, like, how do you make the economics work, right? Like, where do things, when you think of making this, distributing it, owning the whole process, and now I don't know if you look at it as it relates to another vending machine business, a quick serve restaurant, a ghost kitchen, like what is even the comparable that you start to like frame this around?
Yeah, so two different questions in there. So like the simplest way to think about our business is the like kind of variable margin of the product that we're making. So if I sell you a salad for $10, how much did the food, the packaging and the labor cost to make that item? And then how much is like what we call the cost to serve, like delivering it to the fridge, the credit card fees, any rev share. And so from day one, like I had met a number of people from the vending industry and they're like, look, you got to understand the unit economics of that one location. And then are there enough locations? Can you like replicate that? So that's really how we spent the first couple of years. But then the other component is the high fixed cost, and so it's just a math problem. Like this is the fixed cost of having a facility, having a distribution network. Can I get enough locations? Like how long does it take you to get there? But that is definitely like one of the larger challenges of the business.
When you're talking about it, there are so many other, I don't know if it's models or concepts, but you think like, okay, vending machine, it's like, and people have tried this to varying degrees of success. Like, why don't we just stock it with healthier items versus making everything that's in there? And then there's like, hey, why don't we deliver a meal kit, or why don't we deliver fresh made meals? How do you think about the trade-offs, and maybe even if would you consider doing this, or have you thought about it, and why you've stuck with like the vending as you've continued to scale?
Yeah, so that kind of touches on the second part of your question, like what is the comparable set? And it's actually been one of the challenges on like capital raising side is you show people something that's not a restaurant, it's not a vending business, it's not a CPG company, it's not a D2C delivery model. Like there's no other comparable business. And so you're like, this is really simple to understand, but like how do we know you're doing it well, because we
Yep.
can't like hold up the P&L from the restaurant that you're comparing yourself to and say like this is better or worse. So I think for us that has always been like core is like, do you really have to do it this way? Because it's also makes it much harder to explain it and to comp it. And over and over and over again we kept coming back to yes. And really the core thing, so in terms of like competing with a restaurant, there are a lot of great healthier restaurants today that service kind of like a higher end, that quick service or like fast casual model. And even the ones that are doing a really great job in terms of the price point for consumers are still 2 or 3 times as expensive as a McDonald's. And our goal was to say, how do we take products at that quality level and health profile and make them like mass market like McDonald's? So right off the bat, like you have to have a fundamentally different cost structure and go to market strategy as a restaurant. So it's like, okay, that's out. A lot of people had tried various ways of addressing it with the traditional model, it just didn't work. So then you look at like the vending industry and like they would just add products. And one of the key things is their distribution networks are way different. So they're not refrigerated. They don't go to the machines as frequently. The machines themselves aren't refrigerated in most cases. If they are, like it's the machines are actually designed only to sell like Coke and Pepsi products. So you can't just like jam a salad jar in a Pepsi machine. And so that there's issues there. And then on the D2C side, I think the biggest, we have played with that over the years. We actually did it during COVID. What we found is that you need the same kind of returns on your scale because you've got that fixed manufacturing, large distribution overhead. But the returns as you scale are not as good because of the investment you have to make in marketing and retaining customers. So me spending money on social media to try to get you to buy 6 salads a week, that's a really hard flywheel to get going. And actually, the bigger you get, the more expensive the customers get because it's harder to find them. In our case, like I want to be, if I can serve you like 6 to 10 meals a year, that's like double to quadruple what like the average Chipotle is doing in terms of frequency. And I'm paying nothing to acquire you as a customer. I'm setting up my retail location through the fridge and you're seeing it, and you're hungry and you buy something. So it's a different, that was really the key element there, was like that flywheel. Like it's going to take longer to get there because you have to build it fridge by fridge, but you're going to continue to get leverage because you're not going to be paying someone else to give you customers.
This episode of the Fitt Insider Podcast is brought to you by EGYM. EGYM makes some of the most innovative strength training machines on the market, but that's only one part of their integrated ecosystem. With connected fitness equipment, AI-powered gym software, and a comprehensive corporate wellness offering, it's forging the future of preventative health. Partnering with companies worldwide, EGYM's WellPass program improves employee health by expanding access to premier fitness and health facilities. Upgrading gym floors, EGYM equips every operator with smart equipment and AI tools to create hyper-personalized training plans for every exerciser. Putting it all together, they're transforming healthcare through exercise. Experience the power of EGYM's ecosystem at egym.com. Yeah, that customer acquisition piece is so unique in this case. The marketing, the like all of it, you're basically saying like, no, we're just here. Like we are the option. We are on site. And so if you see it and you want it, you're going to buy it. And hopefully you like it. So you'll buy it again.
Yeah. And we'll just keep trying harder to like make that better and better and better.
Yeah, it's crazy and like super counterintuitive when you think about that. But then it does kind of shift things to say like, okay, your customer is like the location. And so how do you get in the door with them, whether it's a partnership or you mentioned rev share at one point, like, are you just, if you think of customer acquisition or like to the extent that there's a sales force, like calling and trying to say like, hey, can we set up a machine here and we'll prove to you, right, that people like it.
Yeah. So this is probably one of the most surprising things to me is like right out of the gate, I'm thinking I have this great idea. And one of the premises of the business was it's only like this tiny vending machine. Like you should leave all this empty space everywhere. All I need is a plug. Like, let me just plug it in and you get this great thing for everybody and you don't owe me anything. Like, in fact, I'll pay you. And so many people said no. And the reasons were multitude, but, kind of came down to the form factor of the machine or like, what products were in there. And so we spent a lot of the first years actually like getting better aligned with what like the clients wanted us to have and building our rep. The second reason was like people were unsure. Like if you put a vending machine in the middle of your lobby and then the thing's broken all the time and I go out of business, I never show up and get it. Like you've just got problems. And
Yeah.
so we had to really prove ourselves in the market. Like every day we were there, every day there was food. People, we used to say it was the one thing that like a building manager could put this into their building and actually get compliments on. Like everything else, people complain. If you change anything about a building, somebody doesn't like it. This was like you will get compliments every time. And once people started hearing from their friends, like, oh, yeah, I put one in my building and it went great, or it's in my hospital and people love it. That's really when the flywheel started to go. But we still have a sales team that actually has to physically go in, figure out where to put it, work with the different teams on safety. In places like California, you need to like anchor a vending machine for earthquake safety. So there's a lot of logistics to actually getting that fridge in the ground, which is why we have a sales team that goes out and does that day to day.
One thing I also wanted to revisit, you talked about, the food that's actually in there. And at one point, kind of leaning into this idea of healthy food, like functional foods or high protein, or, maybe that not resonating. How do you know, or how do you go about getting that kind of like customer feedback to say, oh, this is what people want, this is what we are going to put in there? And how much, I guess, does like just trends in what is healthy food, or what is popular right now with people, like factor into that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we obviously are looking at like big macro trends, right?
Yeah.
So, like people want more protein in their meals. Like, what are we doing to incorporate more protein in our meals? So that's happening in our terms of like innovation and marketing teams would say, like, what are the things that are big picture people are looking for? And then you also use a lot of common sense. You're like, okay, well, people eat a lot of sandwiches. So can we make a really good sandwich and get it into a vending machine? The question there is like, what's the price point and the quality level? So we spend a lot of time thinking about like what is in the market for a sandwich or a salad. Where do we fit in that equation? So we can't charge like what you would pay at a very high end location. We can't necessarily compete on scale against somebody that's a huge 40,000 location QSR concepts. Like where do we have a right to win within that space? And then we come up with a ton of concepts. We test them against consumers. Then the real magic is like once it goes into the fridge, we get feedback right away. So like from your purchasing behavior, I can tell like you bought it once, you never bought it again. That is a product that maybe somebody was excited about, but we executed terribly, or the other way around, like something that very few people are trying, but once they try it, they're buying it over and over and over again. It's like something about the way we're communicating the value proposition to consumers is not good. Like, what do we do to improve that? And we look at that site by site and like consumer by consumer, and we try to match like this is what this site is more interested in. So like certain sites might over index on sandwiches and others on salad or vegetarian versus high protein. And then a lot of it was constrained by the scale of the business over the last few years. So we've intentionally limited the SKU count and minimized the number of rotations that we're doing. But this year is the first year that we're actually going to launch like 25 new products, double our SKU count, and really leaning into that. So we actually have a pilot line that runs like kind of the way I operated when I first started, that will make like, a few hundred items instead of 10,000 of them, and send them to a subset of fridges. And then we'll look at how those perform in those fridges and then scale it up, is like probably something that most other people can't really do. And then we also have surveys on the fridge. So every time you buy something, we're asking you like, I just bought lunch and it was like, do you like pepperoni? Yes or no? Because we're trying to figure out like, should pepperoni go into this wrap that we're designing for consumers? And we can leverage that information not just to design the products up front, but also to decide where to send them on the back end.
Yeah, just back to that core data and analytics, like tracking everything, measuring everything, and then quickly kind of refining based on that and then getting it back out there. Maybe a couple more questions before we wrap up. I think the most recent figures out there is like you raised $30 million in 2018. So quite a while, but also you've scaled from hundreds of locations to thousands of locations. You mentioned, the challenges in fundraising with saying like, hey, what is the comp for this? And like, how do we know this grows over time? Like, how do you think about, capital and financing and continuing to scale like at this point?
Yeah, I mean, so it changes at every phase. And sort of early on, we were more in like a venture backed company stage. Now it's more like growth capital. So our biggest investors at this point are a family office and a strategic fund that's actually the former CEO of McDonald's. So it's evolved in terms of like people who really have the industry expertise and the capital to be able to support the company through that phase. And I would say like the thing that I'm really grateful for is we were able to get people that understood that story, and we met them 7 or 8 years ago, and they're like, okay, this is going to take like 2,000 locations. Like that's what it's going to take. The question is, how long does that take? But like they've been very consistent partners in understanding that like this is just a matter of time. And so I'm very fortunate to have people that understood that early on, but we spent a lot of time trying to find those investors.
And what does that, when you think of whether you're communicating to them or to the team or just even sitting there, like amongst like the executive team saying like, hey, these are the benchmarks, these are the goals, this is the roadmap. Like this is really how we continue to not just scale the company, but also kind of execute some of those, the goals and the vision you set out at the beginning, which is like, hey, can't we just have these everywhere where people are searching for, healthy food, whether they're a traveling salesman or whether they're just, a health conscious person going to work?
Yeah, I think so. Like, it's interesting because, like, with the team, it's mostly like we all work here because we want this to exist. We know it should exist. Like, it's important. And I think with investors, it's more about the opportunity. Like, whether you care about healthy eating or not, there is a huge unmet need for this type of product at this price point, this quality level in these locations. And so for you, like, just understand how huge that opportunity is, and that we will, if you also care, solve a really big, important problem along the way. So we kind of always start there. And then, like, the next two things are, as a reminder, like, this is the scale you have to reach for this business to really work and be great. And here's how we're tracking against getting there. And then here are kind of the sub metrics that we're trying to drive, depending on the phase of the business. So there have been phases where we were building out our sales team, and the key was like, okay, how many opportunities are they opening? How many locations are they closing? What's the quality of those locations? Last year, everything was about like cost and supply chain infrastructure and efficiency. And so we're looking at like how many minutes is every drop, and what's the individual price per unit down to the penny. Like, okay, we saved a penny this week. That's amazing. And then those metrics stick, like they stay on the scorecard and you have new ones. So right now, because of all the innovation that we're doing, the really big focus is like, how do we get more customers at locations to buy the next thing? So when you look at it, for every 100 people that are near a fridge on any given day, only one person actually buys something. So, and actually two people will touch the fridge and like think about buying something.
Wow.
So like our big push is like, how do we just get a couple more of those 100 people? Like, what are we missing? So one of the biggest product launches that we've done in a while is like very protein forward full size jar bowls. So it's like a 750 calorie meal, 50 grams of protein for like $12. Like you pick up like your average fast casual meal and compare it to this, and it's like double the protein in terms of like actual meat, and then everything is like this clean ingredient. So it'd be really interesting to see how that evolves.
Yeah, if I could just get you to ship that to my house, pretty much on a subscription, like I would, let's do that.
Yeah, exactly. It weighs like 2 pounds. You grab it and you're like, oh man, that's like a real meal. And I think like that's an example where like I often eat meals like that when I'm not eating Farmer's Fridge, but like they've never been on the menu. And so that goes back to the common sense. Like, where are those buckets of consumers that like we know we're missing out on serving you, but we can. And so here's that what we're gonna do.
Yeah, like at the beginning, like kind of coming full circle. I think just like a lot of people listening or when they encounter it, they're kind of like shake their head and they're like, yeah, this like we need or want more of this. So whether it's for, consumers or potentially locations that maybe want to get one installed, like where would you point people to learn more?
I would go to our website, just like submit the form to request a fridge. That'll get you at least attention. So if you have like 10 people in your office, we will probably deliver a catering order. We won't drop off a 14 square foot, 800-pound vending machine, but it's definitely like the starting point for us triaging you. Like, this is the best way to get Farmer's Fridge. And then if you're an individual consumer, you definitely want to download the app. Like, you can reserve ahead of time. You can see what the inventory is. You can find locations around you. One of the most interesting things is when I talk to people, they've usually been to like one location, but they don't realize there's like 25 more in their kind of regular routine. So it's a good chance to try to understand, like, where are these things around me?
Awesome. We'll make sure everything's linked up and encourage people to reach out, and super grateful for the time today. Yeah, I really enjoyed learning more.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Joe.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you got value from the conversation, please consider subscribing and sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It's a massive help. And if you want more content like this, including news and insights on the latest industry developments, subscribe to the Fitt Insider newsletter at insider.fit.co. And one more thing, you can learn more about our recruiting and consulting services at fit.co. That's FITT.co. I'll see you here next week.